Hello everyone, and today, as voted on in my community section by you guys, I'm going to bring you tips on how to deal more damage in your naval battles. I came up with 5 fairly broad categories that I thought would be kind of the capstones of just dealing more damage in your matches, and then I have a little bit of elaboration on each. So getting right into it, the first of these is an easy one with surviving longer. I have talked about this before, so I will keep it fairly short on this one at least. You can't deal damage if you're paying Nemo a visit under the waves. If you're sunk, you're not shooting your guns back at the enemy, therefore you're not dealing any damage. So basically don't be an easy target by sailing in a straight line, sitting still, rushing the enemy team with a fairly lightly armored ship, or just staying broadside while a bunch of people are firing at you. Stay very aware for shots coming your way, don't just tunnel vision or stay in your gun sight for the entire game, because sometimes you can notice that somebody just shifted their guns towards you, or they just launched a salvo towards you, and you have enough time to react to that to where it won't hit exactly where they thought they were aiming, and if they were aiming for your magazine, well, that could just save your life. In saying so, this goes hand in hand with dodging any enemy fire and shooting back at those who are trying to hit you and trying to sink them first. At least if you cripple their ships, it may slow down their rate of fire, or even take out their guns so that they aren't hitting you with as much firepower. Some players also don't work very well under pressure, so you actually firing back may screw up their aim and make them miscalculate their own shots, which will once again make you survive a little bit longer and could just get you that kill before they sink you. Also, if you're under attack and the shell hits are unavoidable, make sure to angle your armor if it's going to be effective against the shells that are coming towards you. Obviously, if you're in a light cruiser and a battleship is firing at you, this probably won't help you very much as they'll just detonate inside of your ship. But if your armor is angled against shells that can be bounced by it, it will prevent you from taking that extra damage and will throw off the enemy aim if you keep wiggling your ship back and forth to where maybe they're not even hitting quite where they want to if they know that you're angling towards them. And the last thing I want to say for this is stay aware for torpedo boats or destroyers with long-range torpedoes in order to avoid their torpedo salvos. This is a little bit harder with the torpedo boats as sometimes they're not always spotted and they have very fast torpedoes, but if you know that there's a shimikaze or Japanese destroyer on the enemy team, you should probably keep an eye out for where it is because you definitely don't want to have a Type 93 find the side of your ship because that'll send you back to the hangar rather quickly. And moving on just from surviving, the next thing would be knowing your ammunition that you're using. There are 3 main ammo types with some variations of each, but I will focus on the main 3 for now. This means that when I talk about high explosive, I'm not going to talk about high explosive base fuse. If you want a breakdown of all the different ammunition types, I can work on that one a little bit later. But rolling right into high explosive, of course, this is the typical stock ammo for every ship in the game. It features fairly low penetration with high explosive filler that will typically detonate on contact and splash a bunch of enemy ships' modules, causing a lot of damage over a wide area. It will typically only damage exterior modules though, but it can penetrate very light armor. So if you have a fairly high caliber high explosive shell and you're shooting at a destroyer, you may find yourself actually penetrating them and causing massive amounts of internal damage. It does, however, struggle to damage ships with moderate to heavy armor, and you'll find that you'll mainly be just destroying deck modules on these. And the last thing on these is the large caliber high explosive shells can actually cause heavy flooding in lighter ships if the hits are lower on the hull, and they almost act like a torpedo in that case. It won't have as lengthy of a repair time for the enemy, but it will still be a significant repair time and could add up to them being sunk just by flooding. The second of the 3 types of ammo is semi-armor piercing, which trades a little bit of the explosive filler of the high explosive for penetration. It will penetrate light and moderate amounts of armor and cause massive internal damage, but it does struggle to penetrate ships that are angled or heavily armored. You don't quite have the penetration as a full armor piercing shell, but you have quite a bit more than the base high explosive. The trade-off of this though is it doesn't over-penetrate light ships as much as full armor piercing will. So full armor piercing will just shoot right through a lighter ship if it doesn't hit anything to detonate with, and this one will actually just penetrate, detonate inside, and decimate the enemy ship's modules. You will find, however, it's not the best for detonating magazines, but it can do it if it's aimed very well, or if it repeatedly splashes the magazine module to the point where it just detonates when you hit it the next time. And it does have enough explosive filler to splash exterior modules if the shells don't penetrate at all, though the effects won't be quite as good as the high explosive if you're just going for module damage. If you are going for full penetration though, you want the last of these three ammo choices, which is armor piercing ammo, which trades even more of its filler for penetration in most cases. It doesn't splash its damage as much, but it will decimate interior modules, and it will penetrate most armor, but like I said before, it can over-penetrate lightly armored ships and not deal damage or not deal its full potential of damage. In my opinion though, they are the best rounds for detonating magazines, as they can penetrate through the water, through the armor belts under the waterline and into the magazines, detonating them with careful aim. And in turn can also cause some floodings if the hits are below the waterline, though if it's not detonating as it goes through that armor, the hole isn't going to be as big as, say, a semi-armor piercing or a high explosive hit below the waterline. Sometimes these aren't the best rounds to use either, as if they have a very tiny amount of explosive filler, like the late US light cruisers that basically have solid shot as their armor piercing, they really won't deal any internal damage as they aren't actually detonating. They will penetrate a lot of things, but they just won't destroy anything extra in the interior modules outside of direct hits. So definitely pay attention to how much explosive filler that each round has to decide if these armor piercing rounds are the right round for you to be using, or if you actually want to lose a little bit of penetration and go back to these semi-armor piercing rounds for that extra interior module damage, and keep those armor piercing rounds for just those extra cases where you need to penetrate a little bit more armor. Working off the ammo types, next up we have aiming. So your aiming will contribute heavily to your damage totals, obviously, because you need to hit the enemy ship, but also where you hit the enemy ship is quite important. This guide is going to assume that you have a good handle on the aiming system, so I won't go into massive details about how to lead targets or aim for specific parts that you want to hit, but you should be adjusting your aim for your ammo type to deal the most damage with each shot, and you shouldn't be shooting the same destroyed module repeatedly, as you're just wasting your damage unless the enemy ship repairs it. So if you take out, say, all the guns on a destroyer with your high explosive shells, why are you still shooting at the guns with your high explosive shells when the enemy ship hasn't repaired them? It's not getting you anywhere, it's not sinking them any faster, and it's not dealing any damage. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. Now, applying what we just heard about the ammo types, we can say that high explosive requires direct hits and will fail to damage if the shell hits the water first. You can aim for the hull with lighter ships, but most of the time you should aim for the deck and try to destroy the exterior modules, and potentially turrets, because then the enemy ship can't deal any damage back to you. Contrary to high explosive, the semi-armor piercing shells should be aimed to hit the enemy hull directly, as they tend not to deal damage when they hit the water first, as they lose a lot more of their penetration going through the water and just bouncing against the hull and the armor plates that are under the waterline. You should target lighter ships with these that you can decimate with a moderate penetration, and adjust to aim for magazines if your shells have the capability to actually penetrate them. Otherwise, go for the engine rooms and the shell rooms as your prime targets to just explode everything on the enemy ship and really drain their crew down. If you're dealing with ships that have heavier armor, adjust your aim higher to hit the lighter armored sections of the enemy ships, like the bow sections or the decks at range, and you may still find yourself penetrating and getting into some of their modules that they kinda care about. Even if it's not burning right into their engines and causing massive interior damage, you can still hurt them as you're getting through these lighter sections and still getting into, say, the shell rooms or just compartments in general. On the other hand, armor piercing with its high penetration capabilities can be led to hit the water just before enemy ships, and dive under the waterline to hit modules below those heavily armored belts that are just above the waterline. This makes the magazines, the engine rooms, the transmissions, and the shell rooms your prime targets for dealing the most damage, as your shells will have a lot easier time getting to these, as they don't have to fight through the heavier armor on the enemy ships, as they can just get below the waterline and find the soft underbelly of these ships. Depending on your armor piercing capabilities, sometimes you don't even have to worry about this. You can just aim for the armor belt and penetrate right through it. But other times you may have to go back to the semi-armor piercing method of adjusting to hit the less thick sections, such as under the turrets or just bow sections in general. If you are over penetrating with these shells, however, you may want to switch to semi-armor piercing or wait for the lighter ship to angle to give the shells more quote-unquote ship to penetrate and fuse inside of, or just aim for the engine specifically, as they will have enough mass to make your shell fuse. With all of these shell choices, you still need to use the UI display to determine where to shoot the enemy vessel. It's less effective if you are firing at an already heavily damaged section, and the hit markers and the hit camera can help you adjust your aim towards the sections that you actually want to hit. On top of this, securing kills will give you a decent boost to your damage numbers, as you are finishing off the last of that ship's crew, but stealing the last few crew percentages from a sinking ship will not be as much of a reward. So kill stealing won't totally benefit you as much as you think it is. Assists also do reward damage as well, though it's not quite as much as securing a kill on your own. With aiming out of the way, we can move into knowing your enemy. And this may seem complicated, but you don't have to memorize the minute details of every ship in the game, but generally knowing details about ships in general are useful for knowing where to shoot at. Obviously the engines and transmissions are typically center mass, the magazines are below the turrets, and both tend to be below the waterline. Shell rooms tend to be just under the turrets, typically just below the deck level, and the bridge and all the turrets are fairly easy to see if you're stuck with high explosive. So if you know these facts, you really don't have to differentiate the different ship types that you're looking at, because they're all going to have that same stereotypical placement for all these components, and you can kind of just apply it in general and aim for where you want to hit. And knowing these key component locations, you can also consider that the armor belts typically protect the midship sections of each enemy vessel the most, and they kind of lessen towards each end of the ship, leaving many ships with fairly unprotected shell rooms or magazines, and many are easily penetrated straight on through the bow. So if you can't penetrate the armor belt straight on, maybe you should try shifting your aim to penetrate one of these weaker sections. And like I said before, use the UI to tell if your shells are penetrating or not, and adjust your fire accordingly rather than repeatedly hitting the same section of armor that your shells just don't want to go through. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to talk about target priority. I chose the background footage for this not just because I'm grinding out the German battleships and I was doing the Strasbourg event at the time, but these 12-inch guns on these German battleships are fairly finicky, and they make me apply this target priority a lot more than other ships where I can just penetrate everything that I want. So these aren't really just bullet points that I made for this video, they're actually things that I've been applying in all my games, which contribute heavily to the damage that I do overall. But my gameplay aside, you should have a target priority checklist in your mind when you're selecting who you want to shoot at. You should be focusing threats first, aka those ships that are firing at you, close ships that can heavily damage you that you can definitely take out. So obviously if you can't penetrate them when you're close and they're ignoring you, maybe poking the bear isn't the best idea. And the other thing that you should be focusing is ships that have dangerous or long-range torpedoes that could just end your game in an instant. Your next priority would be focusing the closest enemy to you that you can penetrate easily to help boost your damage numbers up a little, and it also removes the enemy ships from the match, further contributing to your win. The third thing on your target priority list should be focusing on threats to the team that you can destroy, aka strong enemy ships that you can penetrate, or those that are pushing cap zones, or even just helping to destroy those that are attacking teammates, helping your teammates live longer, and pushing your team towards that eventual victory. And the last would be ships that you have a hard time destroying, but really don't fit the other criteria. Typically this would be towards the end of the match, or if you have cleaned out all the enemies in your current location. So if there's, say, a Scharnhorst that is still being a pain by the end of the game, obviously you may not have a ship that can penetrate it very well, but if you're shelling it along with your whole team, well, maybe eventually you'll sink it. When you are working down this list though, definitely don't just sit there and shoot over an entire enemy team at a ship you cannot penetrate, because it means you're just missing out on all the damage you could be doing to the closer ships, and possibly gets you destroyed in turn by the ship you were targeting, because, well, if you can't penetrate them, there's a good chance that they have guns that can penetrate you. And even if you are penetrating this ship, you are giving up a lot more easily achieved damage that is sailing closer to you, as ships at range can dodge your fire more effectively, and your shells will also have less penetration. So you won't be dealing as much damage overall, and you could be dealing no damage just because the enemy vessel is dodging all your shots. Both of these are especially true for people that try to revenge kill, but can't harm the ship that killed them. Yes, I'm calling that out directly because it is annoying, and really that's all it is. You're only being annoying, you can't deal any damage, and it's just costing you your points. So for your sake, and well, not even mine because you're not damaging my ship, stop doing it. Anyways, hopefully this helped out a little bit and helps you get a little bit more damage in your games. Maybe win a few more matches just because you're dealing a lot more damage and killing enemy ships more effectively. If you have any other tips that you could give, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And good luck out there, guys. I will see you in the next one.